to start the podcast now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to
The podcast. What do we call this? The Midweek?
We call it the Midweek podcast, and on our website it says every Wednesday, and I think we've hit every Wednesday only twice in a row.
Why we should just have it not
It's like sometimes on Wednesdays.
Yeah,
that's what it should
usually
say.
it's probably 2 a month, I would say, is the rhythm that they drop, roughly.
Nice.
That's fine.
I feel like
Do you feel like it should be weekly? I don't think it should be weekly.
I think it should be weekly, but
You think we should have one every Wednesday?
I think so.
Why?
I don't know.
Okay.
Just get in the habit of it, and then I can know when I come into work we're recording a podcast.
See, that's
just
the thing I find from you guys is
blanket.
you all have this thing where you're like, I want to know what to do at my job. And
No, I want to know, should I go start working on other
I'm
stuff?
teasing you. My point is that's a reasonable thing to want. And I don't think anyone who's ever worked for me has ever had that luxury of like,
Right.
there's always that, is
this happening?
Is this happening or is it
Yeah.
going to happen this week? I know. I'm sorry.
I forgive you.
I actually wasn't even sorry.
No.
So I reject your forgiveness because the apology was
Then I'm
insincere.
still mad about it.
Well, there we go. Here's what we're going to talk about today. It's a question. It's like, are we a big church? Or what size church are we? Or what is that? Here's where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Every newcomer gathering that we have, and a lot of our topics come from newcomer gatherings, or in the case today, I had breakfast with a guy who's new to our church, and he had a lot of questions, and really good questions. And one of the things he said is, I've never been a part of a church this big.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the same token, he's like, but my wife grew up at this church, which is like way bigger.
Right.
And we have people every newcomer gathering that are like, one couple will say, yeah, we were at such and such church and we just wanted something a little smaller.
Yep.
And then someone else will be like, yeah, we were here and we needed something bigger that had more going on.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves in this weird, what are we?
It's like by all statistics and measures, I would say we're a big church, but
Yeah,
I just think geographically we are located betwixt a few
We're in the land,
very, very large churches.
the land betwixt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's people have an expectation and like an
What
experience with
So what a
larger
big
churches
church
than us.
is.
Right.
Yeah.
But they don't but for most people across the country, I think we would be a very large church.
Yeah, but it's the reason numbers aren't what we care about, and you'll just have to trust us on this, but we don't have staff meetings about how to get bigger and how big we can, that's not what we think in terms of. We're always talking about how do we take care of people? How do we add more?
We talk about doing things better.
Doing things better.
It's not about getting bigger, but we are accommodating the fact that we are growing
Right. So
by like adjusting check-in or something.
Correct. We're adjusting things and we're trying to make sure there's plenty for people to sink their teeth into and grow. And so as we grow, we have to add more things and whatnot. But our aim has never been like, let's get bigger.
Yeah.
That's never been a thing.
We've never put a number on the board and said, when we get here, that's when things really take off. Or
Correct.
Whatever.
This is our goal. We're trying to be this size church. Actually, when we first started, that was a thing, like way back. When I first started working here, there were actually stated numeric goals.
Sure.
And I felt like a failure because I wasn't hitting those goals.
Right.
And I think our culture adjusted pretty quickly. I think the couple that started our church came from a corporate background where that's what you do. You set a number goal, you're accountable to it, go get it or figure it out. And I think they learned early that church probably shouldn't be
That's not
like
the same
that.
thing.
It's not the same thing. There might be principles that you can apply that are helpful, but nah. So with that ended. We don't do that. But we are the church. We are the church that we are. We're the size that we are, and we find ourselves in this weird place where my joke is that we're either the smallest big church you've ever been to or the biggest small church you've ever been to.
Right.
And it kind of puts us in some ways. It's funny to say that, and it's like, haha. But in other ways, it actually makes it kind of complicated in terms of you might walk in here and there's an expectation because of the size that we are on Sundays and maybe the perceived quality of things.
Right.
Like, oh, though this church probably has all these programs and a huge staff. And it's like, well, not really. We have a smaller staff for most churches our size.
Is that true? I don't know any other churches our size.
Yeah, but not like crazy. So you've been here for how long now on staff?
10 years.
10 years. So you've seen the staff grow.
Right.
We weren't that much smaller. We were a little smaller, but we weren't like half the size we were 10 years ago. And our staff was a lot smaller.
Oh, yeah, right.
So you've been here so I would say our staff now is appropriately
Our staff
sized.
has grown a ton when our numbers have not like drastically. Like our staff has probably doubled, if not that.
Correct.
Maybe if
because
not
our
more.
staff was way too small.
Yeah, right.
For a long time. And that was for a variety of reasons. But but we're still on the smaller side of church staffs for a church our size. Like we don't have we don't have as much redundancy in roles and things like that. Like we don't have an associate pastor. Great example. Like a lot of churches much smaller than us would have an associate pastor.
Yes.
What are you thinking?
Well, it's just I think they would have that because that person's playing a different role.
Maybe.
So like we have a ton of like, maybe it's not a ton.
Yeah.
Maybe,
but either way, we are a smaller-ish staff. But point is, if you came here on a Sunday and the scope of things, you might assume that there's a lot more. And in terms of, I want, we have people all the time say, hey, do you have a group specifically for this? Do you have a singles group for people in their 30s to 40s? And we're like, we don't have a group. We're not that specified.
Right.
We have a group for men. We have this group you can come to for women. We have these, and they're used to it. In their mind, a church this size should have like a group for every single demographic category you could possibly imagine. And we want to do that. On the flip side, met with a guy this morning who was like, man, he wanted to connect and we grabbed breakfast. And he's like, I didn't think with a church that size that I would ever be able to talk to you.
An availability.
And I'm like super available. You know what I mean? So I don't know, we find ourselves in this weird in-between space. And I thought it would be worthwhile to just figure out like what even are we and what do we care about and what do we prioritize in that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has less to do with size and more to do with culture stuff. And so like even the move from 2 services to 1 service instantly made you twice as available because where you would have to be running off to the next service or whatnot, you're able to hang out and schedule things before church and schedule things after church and actually have accessibility in a different way. And so I think prioritizing the culture, like I think you being available is something that you've prioritized.
Correct.
Where people can have your number and people can give you a phone call and people can do that. Now, there might come a day. Is there going to come a day that if we grew to a certain number where that would have to change, like just logistically?
I mean, it would have to. I don't know if it would have to change. It would just mean that, I only have the hours in the day wouldn't change.
Sure.
And the number of meals I can have with people throughout the week, for example, wouldn't change. If there's twice as many people wanting to meet with me in those times, something like that would have to change, I guess. So to a certain degree, it is going to be dependent. Like there's limits. So we have a culture that works up to a certain limit. And then if it got to a certain size, I guess you'd have to adjust.
Right.
But then even in my lunch this morning, or my breakfast rather this morning, I have lunch in the mornings now. It's really cool. I have breakfast at night, lunch in the morning. But in my breakfast this morning, we were just talking about church size dynamics. And I was like, man, I don't know if we'll ever be like that because to a certain point, we would have to make decisions that would drastically change our culture to become like that. And I don't know if that's something we're ever going to do.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, unless the knock-on effects of growing like made it so, but we don't control the growth. I guess that's one of the other primary filters that define our culture. You don't
control the growth, but you can control how big you're trying to be.
Right.
And I think something that's interesting about his hands is we're not trying to be a certain size.
Right.
Like there's no...
We are what we are.
We are what we are. And if we grow, we grow. And we're happy about it. And we're like, great, more people. That's awesome. And then we figure it out. We go, we need people to park at Lowe's. We need to create a new kids space. But we're not trying to be a certain size church. So our growth it's not accidental, but it is more organic. And then we kind of handle it, if that makes sense.
Right.
Which probably means we don't handle it well all the time.
With the caveat of having a facility that can kind of accommodate
we have a large building.
A very wide range of sizes because we can do a lot of really small things and use the student center and it feels just as full because we're not using a big empty room. But we can also do an event that has 1,000 people and it feels just as good in terms of having the facility. So I think we've been gifted with a facility that allows us to be a medium church because we've got the flexibility of doing small things and big things. And
we're weird. We're just weird. And that's where every time someone...
Where a lot of churches that might even be our size, attendance-wise, have to do 3 services to even fit that in. And so
if you walked in on a Sunday at 1 service, it would feel much smaller.
Correct.
But you have to add all 3 of those together. Yeah, that's interesting.
Or like have to renting like a pavilion to go do something with your whole church versus having it hosted at your building.
Yeah.
It adds to a lot of things. I pulled this up. I shared this with you a while ago. This is a Tim Keller, I guess, article. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
Called Leadership and Church Size Dynamics. And it's really good. So I just recommend people read it. I don't know. Maybe we can link
I remember
it.
you sent it to me.
Link it in the thing.
That. Yeah.
He talks about
link right here.
I don't think you can put a link on the screen anymore.
Link
in the description.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
I've seen that in videos.
Is that still a thing?
I don't know.
I think it used to be. Well, we'd have to like make a video about it. I don't know.
I
don't know how it works.
There's a link somewhere.
He says, every church has a culture that goes with its size, which must be accepted. Most people tend to prefer certain size culture, and unfortunately, many give their favorite size culture or moral status and treat other size categories as spiritually and morally inferior. They may insist that only biblical way to do church is to practice a certain size culture, despite the fact that the congregation they attend is much too big or too small to fit that culture.
So let's pause there. When you read that, what are like things that come, like what do you imagine? Imagine like a smaller church being like, if you're a bigger church, you're less committed to.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, or as the size that we are, we often have people come up and ask us to do things that are impossible for our size culture. So like you were saying, like, hey, why don't you have this group or that group or this group? It's like, well, usually that's part of a bigger staff where there's a staff person that's specialized in executing those things. Or they're like, hey, why haven't we done, something this way, like lunch after church with everybody? It's like, well, we can't really do lunch after church with everybody like you would at a smaller church. Because it becomes a chaotic.
I was talking to the guy that I was having breakfast with today, and I said, hey, he seems excited about the church, and it's great. Mm-hmm. And I said, just so you know, he's used to a smaller church. And I said, you're going to have to put more effort in here to get to know people.
Right.
Because at a smaller place, there's nothing wrong with it, but he's in his mid-20s. It's like, well, here's the 10 couples in their mid-20s who go here.
Right.
And that's that. And so
there's just a default of like, if you're here for a month, you know everybody at a smaller church.
Yeah. It's just that it's kind of done for you. Mm-hmm. So the church can kind of make friends for you because it's it's like if you went to a small school.
Right.
It's like, well, you're in the class. Even schools in general kind of make friends for you, right? When you go to elementary school might be a good example. An elementary school might be large, but the child doesn't experience the school. They experience their class.
Right.
And that class kind of makes your friends for you. When little kids go to school, their friends are their classmates because someone decided here's who's in this.
Yeah, right.
And you're with the same 30 people all the time, right? But at a church our size, we're going to have lots of opportunities, but you may have to put in more. You might have to initiate a little bit more to go, I want to connect with these people. Like, we might have events that bring you together, but you're still going to have to go find people.
Yeah, and so to address that, like not one of them is wrong or right.
No.
And it's not right for us, given the facilities we have and the situation that we came from, like to say like, oh, well, if you're a church of 150, like you must be doing something X, Y, and Z wrong because of X, Y, and Z.
Oh, I've seen it on both ends.
Right.
So, famously a couple of years ago, there was a pastor of a really large church that said on a Sunday that if you ever say we're going to leave here and go to a smaller church, that means you don't care about the next generation. And they literally said, because what's going to happen is your kids are going to go to that. You're going to force your kids to go to that church. And the assumption was that church was going to be boring.
Right.
And their kids' stuff's going to be terrible because this church is huge. So it had all kinds of kids' stuff. And this pastor said, you basically don't care about the next generation. And then your kid's going to go to college. And if they end up at a church, it's going to be because they find a really big church that has a college, big enough to have a college ministry. Basically, if a church isn't big, it isn't good.
Right.
And I knew a lot of friends who were pastors of smaller churches that heard that, and it was like hurtful.
Yeah.
But I've also experienced the flip side of that, where it's very easy when you're smaller to look at something bigger and to assume that the way it got bigger was by
sacrificing their
you just
holding
cater,
the scripture, and
you cater to, you tell people what they want to hear, and so there is this dynamic of whatever size you are, it's on purpose.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about this article thing is like it goes through the different like tensions that come with each size. Like there's just going to be advantages and disadvantages for each size, and to just be aware of like, oh yeah, I remember telling a volunteer a while ago, they were wanting to, do something in the student area that we just weren't going to do and probably would never do. And it was kind of hard to say, like, hey, like,
what was it?
It was, it's funny.
I vaguely remember this.
It's actually what we do now with our middle schoolers. So if she had just kind of been patient for a couple more years,
Yeah, I got you.
Not that we would never do it. It was just.
No, I remember the way that they were proposing you would
correct,
do it.
Right.
Was just too it was heavy. It was too heavy-handed.
It's the formalized Sunday school structure of doing small group ministry. Right. So they were wanting to do that.
But they wanted a very specific thing that we didn't offer.
Correct. And I had to
we
tell them.
weren't looking to offer it in the near future.
I was like, that's not on the radar. And I remember them sitting across from me and going like, oh, well, if that's not on the radar, I don't know if this is my church. And I was like, that might be true.
Right.
And not because of any theological difference, not because of any church hurt, not because of anything other than, like what I want from a church, it can be better provided by a smaller church. And I don't think that was wrong to have that conversation. Now, I don't want to be encouraging that people leave. And I joke about it's kind of what we do now with our middle schoolers. It's not exactly what we do now, but like in different seasons, churches are just capable of doing different things.
Yeah,
and that happens. And so if your church isn't doing something that you want it to do, like be patient with them and encourage them. I've got parents that are really positive and and
this was a situation where the person was offering to do it, but you didn't have a trust level with the person that they were the right person to do it.
Right.
So you were like, no, thank you. Yeah.
Right. And parents come all the time with ideas, and I love hearing the ideas and keep sharing the ideas because those do inform what it's like, oh, the body really wants this. Okay, is that something we're going to do? Okay, let me, tuck that in the back of my mind.
Yeah, we've had lots of conversations like that where someone's had an idea and then we're like, okay, let's start thinking on that, but we don't want to just jerk the wheel and whatever. So a year or two later,
it's
grows,
possible.
It happens. Yeah.
And so, but just coming to terms with the fact that sometimes a large church isn't going to offer you the same personal connection with every pastor or member of staff that you could have at a smaller church. And likewise, at a smaller church, you're not going to necessarily be offered the quality of worship that you would be able to find at a large church, but it's more about, singing together regardless of what's going on. So it's just a different...
You're talking about like musical quality.
Yeah, music.
Like, there's not going to have as many people to pull from.
If you've got
or if you have
100
kids,
people...
If you have kids, there's going to be... Like one of the things that's funny with kids is like if you're at a really small church when the kids are little, it's like it's great because they know everyone in their class. But then all of a sudden they're in middle school and it's like, oh no,
they know everyone in their class.
Yeah. And so I've seen other dynamics too where people will they'll prefer a smaller church when they don't have kids, and then they'll have kids and their kids are getting to that age where their kids need friends and they want to go to a bigger church. But then what happens when your kids graduate?
Yeah,
and it's like now I want to go to a smaller church again. It's tough.
What do you think about that, just in general? Like this, do you think default, like should someone be faithful to one church if they haven't moved? Like
it's tough. I talked about that this morning at this breakfast.
Yeah,
it was like it's informed a lot of this, but I think we're Americans, and I used to feel a pressure that if we did church right, people would be here for like life.
Right.
Unless we did something way off. Say something that's really theologically incorrect and wrong or some moral failure, you know what I mean? And then, little things would cause people to leave. And sometimes little things were things we did.
Sure.
Or sometimes it would just be, I'll use the kids example. I knew a lot of people who I assumed that they were really deeply, like church was a major part of their life. And then their kids graduated high school and they kind of disappeared. And I realized, raising their kids
was the priority.
Yeah. And they felt like church was a really important thing.
And their kids might have been really connected, but they might not have been.
But they weren't as connected.
Yeah.
But their kids were actually the glue here. Okay. So there's a lot of factors. But I do think that because I said we're Americans are pretty fickle. So we don't tend to live in the same place for our whole lives. We don't tend to work the same jobs for our whole lives. We don't tend to we tend to make a lot of changes, and sometimes church is like that, and sometimes people just change church in different seasons of life because they just get tired of a place, and they're like, let's find another place. I think a lot of times people this is a different conversation, but are a little bit too concerned with something feeling new and fresh I have found that the more you plug into a church, the less that tends to happen.
Sure.
Like if church is just something you come to observe and watch and attend, eventually you've just heard that story before.
Right.
Like,
you repeat your stories?
Of course. I try not to too often. I actually will do a search and see when's the last time I told that story, because I have everything in Google Docs.
Yeah, that's smart.
And so I can be like, oh, it's been a while. Okay.
Nice.
But like I told a story about my dog Roxy from back in the day. I've told that story before.
I've heard that story, yeah.
But it had been a long time.
Yeah.
Like 3-4 years. But Alex is leaving? Sorry. Alex has to go. Bye, Alex. Bye. Is it okay? Is it an emergency? No. Did we offend you?
Yes.
When you say you have to leave, wait, do you mean you're leaving the room or the church? He just said he has to leave. It was an open-ended. Oh, all right. I love Alex just said that out loud.
Yeah.
He just leave.
Well, I guess he would have been on camera no matter what.
Oh, okay. He's got to walk across. Whatever. That was Alex, and now he's gone. We don't know where or why.
He just had to leave.
Oh, Lord be with Alex. But so I think size dynamics play into that, because in certain seasons of life, you might prefer a certain size church. And I do think when people have kids, they want bigger because they want more things for their kids to do. But I don't know. I don't like that either too. It's like,
it's hard to say like, oh, at a certain point in your life, we know our church won't be for you. That's like a hard thing to like embrace.
That's not true, right? We have lots of people here who are tired. And lots of people. I think what it is maybe I would challenge someone honestly as a pastor and say, don't let your preferences be what dictates the church you go to. But at the same time, it's totally reasonable in a culture where there's so many churches around,
right?
To be like, I kind of feel like in this season of life, we need a church that's more like this. And I guess that's okay.
Can I read some of these things?
I would love to.
Tell me.
Read it.
House church.
Church.
Up to 40 people in a house
church.
39
people in a house church?
I mean, you can send the kids upstairs. They still count. That's attendance.
39 people?
I don't know.
Guess, have you ever had a...
You have 39 people if you and one other family meet up.
Wait, that's not true. There's 6 of us.
I know. I'm messing with you.
There's 6 of us.
I went to a house church that had about...
You went to a house church?
Probably about 39 people.
39.
Okay.
I would imagine.
I'm just saying that's a packed house.
That is.
But I guess if it's like college students, that's probably not a lot of kids. That's probably like a college student
young
thing.
Couples,
young
potentially.
couples, not as many children yet. Yeah.
All right, we've got small church. Tim Keller puts it in 40 to 200.
40 to 200.
And he calls the 200 like the 200 barrier. That's like a lot of people encounter that barrier as the upper limit, and then you have to change a lot of things structurally to get accommodate past that. Medium-sized church, want to guess? 200 to
1,000?
450.
450.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then he puts large church at 400 to 800. And then he puts very large church as the next category that just shoots up.
Is there something after that? Is there a mega?
Just very large church.
So he ends at very large, which would put us in that category.
Right.
Because we're twice that size.
Yes.
So
does that surprise you?
Yeah, I guess, but not really. I mean, it surprises me in the sense that obviously I've been at his hands for a long time, and we are, typical Sunday here is going to be somewhere between, we're going to live around 1,500 people. Sometimes it's as low as 13 something on a weekend where a lot of people are out of town.
Right.
Sometimes it's going to be as high as 1,700 something. And eventually we'll probably hit 2,000. I don't know, but we're not trying to.
Right.
So we'll see. But we could. How many do you think we could accommodate on doing what we do now? The current structure we have, could we double?
No,
I don't think so either. So we would have to change. We'd have to add a service or drastically change.
Or this goes to my I'm not the boss, but my just feeling of it's okay to hit a ceiling attendance wise and to stay there. I don't think grow at all costs.
I'm not a grow at all costs person.
Well, not grow at all costs, but I'm saying, because grow at all costs, we would be, obviously, I would have changed our thing. I'm saying, I don't think all businesses are infinite line up businesses where it's social media is kind of experiencing this weird moment right now where it's everyone was imagining that this was going to be the world, but it's never made any money. So it's starting to get a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
If you sell jackets, there's only so many jackets you can sell.
Restaurants are an interesting example of this. So when I started waiting tables when I was in college, and this would have been 2002, 2003. And the big restaurants back then were all chains.
Right.
I worked at Chili's, and it was a Chili's and a Longhorn. And I remember one time I had a guy at Chili's that got really mad because the steak wasn't that good. I'm like, there's a Longhorn right next door.
So
that's their thing.
You're here at Chili's.
You're at Chili's. Ordered a steak at Chili's. That's your problem. But then I started working at this upstart chain. It was a chain, but a smaller chain. It was like an upscale Mexican restaurant called Abuelos, and it was really good food. There's one in Chattanooga.
Nice.
It's really good. We should drive there and have lunch. It's worth it, I think.
I don't know.
It's been a while. But then like now we're in this weird era where like a lot of those big chain restaurants have closed or are getting smaller. Whereas 20 years ago, it was like put a Chili's, a this, a that. And now you drive down certain streets and you're like, oh, that used to be a this thing.
Right.
That closed. And you have a lot more people preferring to go to these downtown.
Yeah. Just like a nice restaurant.
Owned.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my point is there was a point with restaurants where it's like if you had a restaurant, it's like, oh, well, it's full here every.
Yeah.
You got to add another
3
one.
exits
add
up
another one.
and
add another one.
It'll be
add
fine.
another one. And then you think that that'll just infinitely happen. But in reality,
right.
At a certain point,
there's a ceiling to how many Chili's can be, how much the population can handle the Chili's. And so
this difference between with church, it's like, do we see ourselves as part of the church in the world? And that other church across the street is also part of the church. And if someone goes across to there, cool.
They're also eating there.
Right, exactly. Or do we see like, no, our specific church model, we need to replicate this over and over again.
Right. And that's where, to me, I'm like, I don't think his hands is the capital C church. Like we as a local church are part of the body with other local churches. And so at a certain point, it's like, yeah, maybe 2000 is our kind of like sweet spot.
Yeah, who knows?
And it's like we're blessed and we're able to make it happen and whatever.
Yeah.
But I wanted to run through some of the descriptions of a very large church.
Let's go through it.
Because
that's what that Tim Keller would say that he passed away recently, right?
He did, yeah. The late, great Tim Keller.
Well, let's say, hold on. You said the late, great Tim Keller. To our knowledge, at the time of this recording, there is not any scandal related to Tim Keller. So we said that if something comes out after the fact, we're sorry.
He lists some advantages and disadvantages.
I feel like you have to give that disclaimer.
A very large church. Because sometimes I'll say we're a mega church, and you're like, we're not a mega church. I'm like, not compared to like Texas. Everything's mega in Texas. Like all the churches in Texas start at 2,000 people.
Is that true?
I don't know.
Have you ever been to Texas?
The amount of mega churches in Texas is insane.
Is it?
There's like
I know I've heard that.
Countless.
I think Georgia and Texas have a lot.
Yeah, right.
Texas probably is the most though.
Okay, so he describes some of the advantages of a very large church: excellence, choices, openness to change, which I thought was an interesting thing.
Definitely.
Low pressure, being multicultural, full service of family support, doing church planting, which we don't do, but larger churches are equipped to do that. Carrying out faith-based holistic ministries. I don't know what that is. What would be a faith-based holistic?
Saying it's a ministry that's
like connected with serving the poor or counseling.
Even like some churches have like physical, like we have a sports program.
Right.
And it's part of our, I know a church that has like a basketball program.
Yeah.
And it's part of their
like
church
community
ministry. There's a ministry person on staff in charge of the basketball program.
Right.
And really what it ends up being is just like it's a basketball league that they pray before the games. I'm just teasing.
And the last one, as a positive, he says research and development for the broader church. Basically, like you can have people that take sabbaticals to do their theological studies. I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay.
That happens. Disadvantages. This is where I was like,
okay,
I really connect with this.
All right.
Commuting longer distances can undermine mission. Do you agree or disagree?
Commuting longer, so people drive that pulls from further.
Yeah, because we've got people from
people make drives.
Calhoun.
Yeah. People drive a long way to come here. Yeah, sometimes.
All right. Commuting longer distances undermines community/fellowship and discipleship.
It is harder. We're not a neighborhood church,
right?
And so, whereas Sunday mornings is one thing, if we said, "Hey, we're going to have a thing on a Tuesday," which we do classes, we do groups and stuff like that all the time, but to some degree, those extra things are a little bit prohibitive because, people have to get off of work.
Right.
And then we know that they've got to get home and then they got to get here and then they got to get back.
And if you live in Waleska, for us, that's a 40-minute drive.
Right. Whereas if you just go to a church that's connected to your neighborhood, it's like, just get him. Dude.
And it also, I think, being a, prohibiting factor for community, it's like, it's also hard when you discover someone you really connect with at church. Like, oh, I love this guy. It's It's like, well, I'm only going to see them on Sundays because we live 45 minutes the opposite directions.
No, there's a couple I know that they don't attend here anymore. It's fine. Like, we have a great relationship with them. And that was their thing. They're like, every couple we met that we really connected with, they live 45 minutes away, and we realized we're just never going to hang out with them.
Right.
And that's okay. Like, but yeah, okay.
He says diminished communications and involvement.
Communications and involvement.
Basically, like, people lose track of like what's going on, because we joke about this with our announcement video, where it's like, you might not be able to, like, if you didn't make it in and see all of the announcements in the announcement video, having a sense of what's happening. Like, oh, that passed me by. I was going to go to that, but I forgot about it because I was just in
I guess. Part of me wants to say, no, that doesn't happen here, because I announce things too before the message, and I send out an email with...
Right.
But also it depends on... Like, email's funny. How many people that go here give us their actual email address versus their junk email
How many
address?
is on your email list that you send out? Your
over,
big
over
one.
6,000.
Right.
But that doesn't include... That's not just total people. Like, that doesn't include children. Like, children aren't included in that. So on our actual quote-unquote roster that we have here, it's over 10,000.
Right. But that's just people who have ever engaged.
Not ever. No, we clean that off.
Yeah, not ever, I'm saying.
But then, like, there's a thing that it has, the online resource that we use for that has something that it calls, like, members, but we don't have membership.
Right.
But that's just the language that it's used to churches having. And it uses things to track, like, and it's over 4,000.
Gotcha.
In the members.
So that's probably
section.
more of an accurate depiction of regularly check people in.
Yeah. Involved in the
sign up to a thing.
I would imagine if you asked people, is His Hands Your Church, you would have over somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 people.
Yeah, right.
Would say that right currently.
Right.
But
our average attendance
is in the 1,500 to 2,000 range.
And there's several others that I don't want to just make this all about negative stuff, but I just connected with that. Because,
what are the other ones that are negative?
Well, I just don't want to be, you don't want to, do I want to, you have to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. Are we ready to crack the eggs?
Let's crack the eggs, yeah.
Displacement. People who joined from a church that was smaller, or if they were part of the church when it was smaller, as it gets to that larger, they feel lost in the shuffle.
I can see that.
And overlooked.
Yeah.
Complexity, change, and formality. So to do events, you actually have to put it on the calendar. You have to communicate it. You have to sign up. You have to account for childcare.
Yeah, things can't be as spontaneous.
It's not just we're all going to do that thing, that mission project, that lunch thing, that whatever. And then succession. When the bigger church becomes identified with the senior pastor, there's not a succession plan.
Yeah, I know some churches that their main succession plan is like a monarchy, where they just the pastor has kids, and it goes to the kids. That's a really normal thing,
right?
And that's weird, right? Because maybe it's great. Maybe the kids are the perfect person because they've grown up in the culture of the church, and they. But I don't know, like that's
So those are them.
So here's all that to say. Why are we even talking about this? Well, it occurred to me too.
Yeah.
But no, it's like what kind of every Sunday people are like, some people come here going, oh, I'm so glad that I found a bigger church there's so much more to do here. And and then the same meeting, there's people here, I'm so glad we found this quaint, smaller church because it's so much more down and it makes me go, what even are we?
Yeah.
Because
I think I do think a significant portion of the people that feel like this is a smaller church identify with the one service thing.
That is the one service thing.
I think if we did two services, we would feel like a larger church because here's the reality for a single service is that you're able to...
We used to be two services.
Right.
And we actually have more people attending now on a normal Sunday at one than we did at two, but it's not that much more.
Sure.
Like we've kind of gotten to the same... One service has become...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for like youth ministry, if you want your kids connected with youth ministry, well, if there's one service, we do our youth during the service, like every single teenager that's part of the youth ministry will be there on that Sunday instead of split between two different
there's
groups.
A family that I got to know a little bit recently, and they have a kid who's got a kid the same age as one of my kids. And it was so cool for me to know, like, oh, well, then our kids know each other.
Yeah, they'll be in the class together.
Because it's not like it could be. And I said, oh, I'll ask my son about your son. And I did. And he's like, oh, I love this. His name's Amos. He's like, I love Amos. And so Judah and Amos hang out now.
Right.
But there was just the knowledge that, well, they're...
I was like, but we're kind of like a first service family or a second service family versus... So I think that contributes to a large factor of like... I think people feel that. They like being part of the large church.
We are probably the most simplified
Right.
version of a very large church you could be.
Correct.
So most of these churches described as very large are going to be more complicated in their structure. We are uniquely simplified.
And even the displacement, to feel lost in the shuffle amongst multiple services is really easy.
Yeah,
And like
totally.
the fly on the wall aspect of sitting there and not participating ever, it's like there's people that I just recognize from walking in the hallways that I can speak to each week and be like, oh, we met last week, we know each other. And they can get involved just through bumping into because we're all here all at the same time. So I think that's really helpful to making it feel small, even though it's a whole lot of people.
It is a lot of people, but it's also like, I don't know.
Do you feel like the bigger church is bad?
No.
Like, I feel like whenever you're like nervous about, not that you're nervous about talking about it, you seem like more skeptical of the larger church than you are of the smaller church.
No, not. I think both. I think everything has strengths. Well, I think the size we are is the right size. And if you're smaller, you're not doing something right. And if you're bigger, you've done something wrong.
Right.
If that makes sense. No. Oh gosh, this is gonna be a really silly analogy. I think I've shared this with you before, but there's this video game that you and I have both played, and it's online.
What is it?
Well, it's a game we've played.
We're not allowed to say it.
I don't know.
Is it rated M for mature?
Probably. But in this game, like, it's online. You don't really play with other people. You can kind of, but it's just you see what other people have done who are also playing the game that you're playing.
Okay.
And so
now I know why you're not saying that.
There's like blood stains on the ground. Okay.
It's Dark Souls. We just say it's Dark Souls.
It sounds so bad.
You're slaying demons. It's good.
That's what you should
righteous.
do.
Yeah.
That's what you should do. I got really big 10 years ago. We both played it. You were like a kid and I was a youth pastor. I was like, oh, you play that game?
Yeah.
It's a cool game. So there's bloodstains on the ground. And when you see bloodstains on the ground, that lets you know other players have died in this place.
Have gone down this.
And sometimes you'll turn a corner and it's just like a long trail of bloodstains. Like there might be dozens of them and you stop and you go, whoa.
Like something's going to jump out here.
I proceed with caution,
Right.
And that's a dumb analogy and maybe I offended people. I don't know, whatever. But I feel like that with the kind of mega church, the multi-campus, multi-service. It's not wrong. I just, man, in the last 5 years alone, the number of churches like that who have gone from seemingly awesome to either just it fell apart overnight, massive scandal. I mean, we can make a list right now of 10 pastors that were, in fact, there's a really interesting YouTube video series called The Elephant Room, I think is what it was called. And it's got all these, this is from like 10 years ago. And it's got
Probably
all these.
From 20 years ago now.
It's not quite 20.
It's like 2006, I think is when that video.
Not quite 20. But okay.
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, that's not that long ago.
Right.
And it's like a who's who of like major giant church pastors at the time. And almost every person that's on there has had a major scandal.
Yeah.
Several are not pastors anymore. Some had like their church completely collapsed. Now they started something else. And at the time, they were invited on it because it was like, you guys are...
These are the cream of the crop.
This is the thing. And there have just been so many of those. So I guess what it is for me is I want this church to be whatever God wants it to be. I really do. And I'll like, that's what when I pray about the church, it's like, what church do you want? Like, and obviously we're doing our best to discern that. It's not like God gives me a list of... but I think one service was something that came from that. Like I fully believe that God laid that on our hearts, and that was a God-directed thing. So I don't think it's wrong or bad. I just know that we're probably at that point where we could be much larger if we one simple change. We could go to 2 services, and like logistically, if we did that well, we should be able to. Like we create enough buzz and hype or whatever, become a fairly much larger church fast.
That growth
to some degree. Like you still have to, accommodate and handle everything. But we did that once before, and we grew a lot when we went to 2 services. And if we did it today, we would too. But I know what it would change. And the main thing for me is God hasn't told me to do that.
Right.
So
I think the other element too, I was thinking about,
and there's all those blood stains. But honestly, there is this. 20 years ago, it was this, hey, start churches and grow, and add a campus and add a campus and add a this and add a that. And I think that most I'll say this. We have that many people coming. It's a lot just to keep up with everything that everyone's got going on.
Right.
And when I think about trying to manage, there's a whole other campus, there's a whole other, maybe I'm just not the guy to do it, but I don't know.
Yeah, and
I'll put it this way, I don't need to be that to feel successful. I don't need us to be bigger to feel that way. So if God wants us to do something, we'll do it. But
there's that element of like, what is different about, there are some church pastors that are like celebrities, and it's like, what's the difference? Like, I think we're not that interested, at least I don't think so, because we've never have had this coordinated, like this online stuff. We've never been like putting clips of you out where it's like, we want this to exist beyond his hands.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, there's never been like this ambition to be
Steve Craig,
cultural influencers. You know?
Steve Craig started our church. He was the first guy. And he met with me when I came here when I was in my early 20s. I was 23. And he met with me. I think I was probably only 24. I hadn't been here that long. And I think he sensed in me that this might sound weird. Like, I'm a good communicator. I would say that when people come here on a Sunday, I'm not nervous that they're going to be like, that was rough.
Right.
Like, I'm good at that. And I feel like I could, from just a communication standpoint, not in terms of ideas or content, I'm just saying just the delivery. I feel like I could be on a stage that's got, if you're at some big conference, and I don't think people are like, why is he on there? I'd be fine. I wouldn't be nervous about it at all. So I was always a really good communicator, and I'm funny and blah, blah, blah. So charismatic, whatever words you want to use. And Steve, I think, saw that in me at a young age, and also saw that I was kind of a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And he met with me and said, hey, the last thing that the world needs is another celebrity pastor. There's plenty of those. And his hand's just never going to be a place where that's a thing. So he really defined that culture. And I had to, at that point, go, do I want to be that? And if I want to be that, this isn't where I need to be.
Right.
And I don't want to be that. And we don't ever try to. So yeah, I mean, there's strategies that, in fact, I know a guy who's a pastor, not the pastor, but he's a pastor high up on staff at a really successful church that has it is one of those things I've talked about, multiple campuses.
Yeah.
And it seems to be great. I have nothing negative to say about it at all. But he's like, yeah, we have a social media guy, and we have like TikTok, Instagram, and we take snippets of messages and we put these things, and we're putting it out there which it gets all these views.
Then does lead to that dynamic of you sitting down at breakfast with someone and they're like starstruck because you've built yourself out to be this person. It's like, well, if it's a normal pastor relationship, like, I'm not thinking more highly of myself than I need to.
Right.
And so, I think
I'm the pastor of His Hands Church in Woodstock, Georgia.
Right.
And it's a big enough church that usually, like this morning, there was someone else that was there that recognized me.
Right.
But I did go to Florida, and at a gas station, they're like,
people recognize, but
it's not.
It's different than like considering social media as another branch of your ministry responsibilities. And I don't think you see it that way. Like, you're not looking at like this opportunity to, well, if more people hear my teaching or if more people connect with His Hands.
My favorite thing on the social media stuff, just it's related, it's a little bit of a tangent, is what you did, where you canceled the youth social media because you were like, I don't want my kids on social media.
Right.
So you were doing like really cool stuff on, I think it was Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram. We did a lot of Snapchat stuff.
You were doing stuff just to get like, hey, get the word out about what we've got going on.
And then one kid came up to me and was like, hey, I got Instagram, like, because you have an Instagram essentially. And I was like, oh no.
I assumed this was something you already had.
Yeah.
And it's pretty negative, but we might as well use it to, please don't delete it. And then you're like, maybe I should just not have it. So you took we don't do any social media for our youth anymore.
So we don't talk about that at all or think about it.
You don't ever say like follow our Instagram. And we don't do that as a church. We don't say follow us on, like on YouTube, I think we have something like 2,000 something subscribers. We've never say like.
No, we did once when COVID hit. We had to get a certain amount because of the streaming rights. And
that's right. I remember that. So we did say, hey guys, if you could subscribe, that'd be great. That
was like a practical thing though.
But it's way more than that now. And we don't go.
Right.
We're not trying to be a thing. So I guess the point is, if there's any point to this, we're the size we are. We are very large, but we didn't mean to be.
Yeah, and we're prioritizing things to make sure that some of the drawbacks of being very large are not as big, and we're also figuring out the other ones.
And if this is your church, you should maybe think through why do you want to be part of a church that's a certain. If size is going to affect your decision, no doubt. There are drawbacks. There are pluses. I mean, like the guy I had breakfast with this morning. Kids stuff is awesome, man. Like you're going to have, like we just have kids, our kids' ability. It's not just the size of church we are. It's also the facility and the prioritization we've given to youth. I mean, you guys do such an unbelievable job with youth that I have 4 kids and I'm really glad they go here. Yeah.
And I was even sharing with some of the students, I was like, hey, there's going to be some like under construction situations going on with like some spaces that are really valuable to y'all. But it's really cool because like our church loves kids and they approve really cool projects for the kids. So be grateful. And if there's caution tape, don't walk past it.
Please
like,
don't.
I don't need your footsteps in there.
Yeah, but if you don't have kids, there's this whole huge section. I mean, there's people here who could come here. They don't have kids. They walk in the front door, go to the big room, grab a coffee, whatever, they leave. 75% of the church they don't even see. You know what I mean? And so think through, man, why am I here? What am I looking for? But maybe I would say even go deeper than that. Like, Lord, what do I need? And when you find it, plug in.
What do you need? And then I think what also do, like...
what can I...
Yeah, what do you bring?
What do I bring?
Because some of those... any church needs you. And some churches need you more than others.
True.
And
absolutely
that
true.
might be a thing where
it's like we had a guy in our worship team named James, and awesome. And he's going to a different church now, and it's fine. We're
mad about it. James, I'm hunting you down.
James. No, James is awesome. He's like on our worship album.
Yeah.
And I love James. Dude, what he probably brought to the table to the church he's at now, it's like they got such a great thing in James.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a gift. That's awesome. That should be good. But yeah, if when you go somewhere, like, what can I bring to the table? That's good. But it isn't, I don't know. In some ways, it's been a random conversation, but that's kind of what these are for.
So we'll see you next time. It might be in 2 weeks. It might be in a week.
And His Hands is a very large.
I like to think of it like
the smallest big church.
So I'm a dude, and dudes' shirts, they come small, medium, large, extra large. And there was a time where I was a Marge. Now I'm like whatever's between a large and an extra large. And it's there's never the right size for me. Yeah. We're kind of like one of those in between sizes on
I'll give you
shirt.
another illustration with it.
All right.
It's generations. So I am technically like there's millennials and Gen Z. What are you?
I'm a millennial.
So I'm pretty sure I'm like the oldest you can be a millennial.
Correct.
But there is a micro generation.
It's called an elder millennial.
Well, there's also this thing called an Xennial, which is you're like Gen X and...
This is what elder millennials do to cope.
Okay. So it's like that.
Yeah, it is like
there's
a
little between. And so that's kind of where we are. We're a very large church that has grown. I mean, we've grown a lot in the last few years, but we're not trying to become a thing. Like, does that make sense? Like, we're not... There's not a master plan where we launch this phase...
Right.
Like, we're very content with where we are, and I hope more people come because that would be cool to have more people contributing and being part of this place. But it's fine. So it has its pluses, it has its drawbacks, and you have to just weigh that and figure it out.
Peace.